Good evening. I'm Phil Donahue, and I'm pleased to greet you in the company of my colleague, Vladimir Pozner, the Soviet journalist, as we take a look at American media. How good, how objective. Not so incidentally, Vladimir Pozner visits us in the United States for the month of May, not long after resigning his job at state-run television in Moscow because they insist that the employees of that television apparatus support, not criticize, Mikhail Gorbachev. How much different are we? How much better are we? And incidentally, what's happening to my industry? Is this Time and Newsweek, or is it People magazine? Remember when Time used to report the news? What's going on with American media? Are we chasing competitive dollars, or are we chasing the news? Our guests have more than a passing interest in this subject, and I am pleased to welcome them. On the satellite from Managua, Nicaragua, where he is a visitor and making speeches, we have Noam Chomsky, the professor at the Department of Linguistics at MIT. You know him as an outspoken critic of American foreign policy, and to be sure, an outspoken critic of American media. An agency, he says, that does the bidding of the establishment. If we don't, we will be looking for work. John Alpert is here. He's the freelance producer and reporter who's covered 10 or more wars over the past several decades, including conflicts in the Philippines, Cambodia, Afghanistan, and Central America. Guess what? He got fired from NBC News because he smuggled himself into Iraq with Ramsey Clark. Was he fired? Ask Steve Friedman. He works for NBC News. He's the executive producer of the NBC Nightly News, and as you may know, formerly served as executive producer of The Today Show. He had planned to run Alpert's video on the Nightly News until Alpert was canned, and so was his video, which showed civilian damage and destruction in Iraq. Barbara Reynolds joins us. She's an editor and columnist for USA Today. Miss Reynolds, among a lot of other things, wrote a book critical of the Reverend Jesse Jackson in 1975 titled The Man, the Movement, and the Myth. She is very outspoken about her own game. I am also pleased to welcome a talk show brother, Geraldo Rivera, who, aside from presiding over his own daily talk show for the past 5 years, is going on the air in September with a half-hour syndicated primetime access investigative show called Now It Can Be Told. Perhaps Mr. Rivera will tell us why it wasn't told then. Recently, he acquired a New Jersey newspaper. He is in the print game now. He owns the Two River Times. And finally, Ken Tucker, who is not going to give a standing ovation to media or its people. He's a critic for Entertainment Weekly and has also written for the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Rolling Stone. Vladimir Pozner will offer the first question of Professor Noam Chomsky, as we are pleased to guest on Talk Live on CNBC, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Mr. Chomsky, I know you can't see me. This is Vladimir Pozner speaking. When I watched the coverage of the war in Moscow, watching CNN, American television, watching the press conferences, I saw a subservient media that was almost rolling over to please the military, whining maybe a little bit, but when bullied by Storm and Norman, almost liking to be bullied, kind of saying, ha ha, isn't that funny? If that was not a demonstration of what you, I think, have said before, that this mainstream media just does exactly what it's told by the powers that be, then what was it? How do you feel about this?
Well, during the period that you're speaking of, the period of the American attack from mid-January through the end of February, the media were mainly cheering for the home team. I don't think there was anything that one could seriously call news coverage or analysis. More interesting to me, frankly, is the period prior to the beginning of the U.S. attack in mid-January. And I think that's something that ought to be more interesting to American citizens generally, who want to understand what kind of media system we have available to us. Now, the decision, that's the period of the decision to go to war. Decision to go to war is a very serious matter. It's not something to be taken lightly. Modern war is dangerous, in fact, very likely to be catastrophic, exactly as this war turned out to be. In a totalitarian state, the leadership simply announces its intention to go to war, and the media applaud on command, and the population follows because they have no choice. In a democracy, things are supposed to work a bit differently. If the political leadership determines that it reaches the decision to go to war, it has the duty of presenting a very strong argument, and it has a very heavy burden of proof to meet. The media then have the responsibility of presenting the relevant facts, permitting, in fact, encouraging debate over the issues, analyzing in depth as to whether the possibilities of a peaceful settlement through negotiations and diplomacy have in fact been exhausted. And then after that discussion, the population, in fact, should take a stand on whether to go to war. None of this happened. The president never presented any credible reason for going to war. No reason that was presented that could be taken seriously. No effort was made by the political leadership to show that the possibility of a diplomatic negotiated settlement had been was no longer there, that all efforts had been exhausted. In fact, that couldn't have been said because Washington's position from the beginning was that there will be no negotiations, as the president said over and over. There will be no diplomatic settlement. The media presented virtually no analysis and discussion of the validity of the decision to go to war without exploring diplomatic options. They did not present the facts. I know of only one newspaper in the United States, Newsday on Long Island, that actually gave a serious reporting of the proposals that kept coming. There was a series of proposals for a settlement of the conflict.
Professor, if I may interrupt very briefly, why? I mean, they didn't do this, they didn't do that. Why didn't they do it?
Because the media were behaving as, in fact, in my opinion, they always behave. In fact, I think the basic point was said rather concisely by Lawrence Grossman, who I believe is a former news director at NBC. I said the president sets the agenda. The task of the media is to follow that agenda. That's a little too narrow. The media do reflect divisions within elite circles. If there are tactical conflicts within elite circles, you'll find division over that in the media. And of course, there's some spillage around the edges. I don't want to suggest that this is 100%, but this is quite standard. It was true during the Vietnam War. It was true during the Central America wars of the past decade. It was true during the Gulf crisis. It's true with regard to with the aftermath of the war. Just to give a simply dramatic example of omissions, there is a very courageous and articulate Iraqi democratic opposition, which has been fighting against Saddam Hussein for years, fought against him during the period when he was George Bush's friend, continues to fight against him. They had no access to the American media. In fact, if I wanted to find out the positions of the Iraqi democratic opposition, I either had to speak to them personally or read the European press. That's an astonishing fact.
Professor Chomsky, you have wounded Steve Friedman, who would like to say, first off,
that you're full of baloney. I mean, what do you think the congressional debate was about? Absolutely. What do you think they did in the Congress? The Congress approved going to war, and that was it. They gave the president the authority. That debate was covered full. We had all the anti-war speakers on television, in the newspapers. I don't know what you were watching.
Well, let me tell you, the congressional debate was about whether sanctions would ultimately work, but I don't think you listened very carefully to what I said. What I said is that the task of the media was to consider and present the issue of whether a negotiated diplomatic settlement was possible. Now, in fact, the question of whether sanctions, as I pointed out just a moment ago, when there are tactical divisions among elites, the media will cover it. And there were tactical divisions, but there was also an issue of principle. The issue of principle is whether it is correct to go to war when the possibilities of a negotiated diplomatic settlement have not only not been exhausted, but have not been attempted.
Expert after expert after expert after expert was on television.
From mid-August
pro and con, up and down, Geneva, Baghdad.
Yeah.
Serious and negotiable.
I'm not sure. Can you hear us?
Proposals were virtually unmentioned in the media.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, they were never presented on television. There was no discussion of the propriety of pursuing that path.
Professor Chomsky,
I should
can you hear
say
us
that
at this
about
point?
2/3 of the American
We may have an audio
population
problem.
was in favor of pursuing those options, even though people were unaware that they existed.
Professor Chomsky, can you hear us? We're having satellite problems. Can you hear me?
Now I can. yes.
Very good. Okay, I know you weren't being rude. We wanted to try and develop a dialogue here. The former Joint Chiefs of Staff appeared before Congress and said, I don't think we ought to invade. I think we ought to try sanctions. And I assume Mr. Friedman wants you to know that it was duly covered by the networks. For example.
We're not getting
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, sir. Make your
The
point.
question of whether to pursue sanctions was debated in Congress and therefore covered by the media. But there's a much more significant issue which was not debated in Congress and not covered by the media. That was the question whether to pursue the possibilities for a negotiated diplomatic settlement which would involve Iraqi withdrawal from Kuwait in the context of regional issues that had been brought up by Iraq. Now, that question, there were such proposals from, in fact, mid-August. On August 10th, the National Security Council.
There's some people
Let
here.
me get Ms. Reynolds in
Yeah,
here.
well, I agree with you, Norm. I don't understand, what you're talking about if you're giving the media high marks for their coverage. For example, in the field, the military steamrolled the media. Some of the military detained reporters, shot at, blindfold, did everything they could to keep the story from going home. There was a poison pool. The military censors suffocated the press. And then when you got back home, how can you say that the media did their job when they blocked access from people who opposed the war? From August to January, report after report will tell you that only about 1% of those people who opposed the war ever got on the air. There were also...
No, excuse me.
Now, when we broke for commercial, which of course is very, very much what this is all about, it's all about commercial. It's all about how much money controls the media, at least in my opinion it is. You, Barbara Reynolds, were saying...
I was saying that this could not have been conceived or as the media's finest hour at all. For example, the people who were pro-peace did not get their fair due on the air. There were protest marches, one of the largest protest marches in January. I believe it got 4 seconds of airtime. Alex Molnar, who was a pro-peace worker for military families, he tried to get a pro-peace ad on television, and the networks turned him down.
Yeah,
Three networks and CNN.
Wait a second. We did a spot on him.
Yes,
we had him on for 2.5 minutes.
Did not get in. And Kuwait dropped millions of dollars to PR companies in their ads for go, go, go. Kuwait got on. We didn't know who our enemies were. TV didn't clarify our enemies nor our friend. If we hadn't known about Kuwait, do you think that we would have rallied to them? They're anti-democracy, they're raping women. If we had known what kind of people they were, if TV had have brought that home, if TV would have made it clear
Let's
that this
blame
was an
television
oil war.
for everything. It's television's fault.
Well,
It's not the public's.
Partly
It's not the leaders. Let's blame
Was the
TV.
print
It's
media-
not Saddam Hussein who stormed across the border, enslaving an entire nation, killing civilian and military
Television did that.
totally at random. We forget what started this whole thing. It was an invasion of a sovereign land after the so-called world order that your government presumably buys into, Vladimir. What you had was an aggressor being stopped by the one champion of democracy of the balls to stand up for.
But that's one of the things. That's one of the things that that television has done so badly, is to provide any kind of context leading up to this. I mean, where was any kind of television coverage before we were suddenly voting on going to war and proceeding with
Yeah,
war?
but television is a mirror. It mirrors what's going on. It doesn't lead. Our job is not to preach pro, anti, whatever
television's
government. Our job is to tell the people what we think is going on, and they make up their own mind. We don't make up their minds.
The point is, you didn't tell them what was going on. For example, you did not tell them that there were opportunities for a political settlement and that they were supported by virtually the entire world, including the Iraqi Democrats.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. We covered all the debate at the UN. We covered everything Saddam Hussein even deigned to say. I mean, we covered all of that stuff. It just didn't wash.
You did not cover the Iraqi negotiation proposals of August. You did not cover the Iraqi negotiation proposals of December. You did not cover the fact that the State Department experts themselves regarded them as serious and negotiable in their terms. You did not mention that the Iraqi Democratic Opposition was in favor of them and opposed going to war. All of that was out of the media.
Well, one thing I want to know, and Vladimir, I direct this to you as much as to Professor Chomsky there, what the hell was Peter Arnett doing in Baghdad? Can you conceive of Saddam Hussein allowing a reporter from the United States to cover all the pro-war or pro-administration fervor here? We had a guy there who was telling the American people that civilians were being hit by those bombs. We had a guy there who was saying that war was dirty. We had a guy there who was broadcasting to the entire planet, this bomb dropped here. I mean, that is, to me, inconceivable in your country or in the country where Professor Chomsky broadcasts from now, at least up until a year ago.
Why do we have to measure ourselves against the Soviet Union? Why can't we measure ourselves against our own rules? I mean, we suspended the First Amendment when we decided that we would not pursue this as an oil war. We would not, we would jump on Peter Arnett. I mean, I think that's ridiculous.
That's the other problem.
Jump on Peter Arnett.
You support his presence in Baghdad.
I absolutely do.
Yeah,
although he got taken to the cleaners for it by a lot of people in this country and by the press as well.
The fact of the matter is, he was on all day long, every day, giving people the harsh reality of war, and only in this country could that happen.
War is harsh. If it were not for Peter Arnett, we would have had a bloodless war. We were talking about ordnance. We were talking about collateral damage when we should have said blood. If it was not for Peter Arnett, we would not have seen the bombing of children. We would not have even known.
That is baloney.
And how could
that is
You weren't
baloney.
bringing it.
How did he say that Vietnam, the media played along in Vietnam?
The media played along in Vietnam. And let me tell you, if we got the footage, we would have put it on.
Why
Because
didn't
Peter Arnett was being used by Saddam Hussein to deliver his message. Fine, we took a lot of the stuff that they had and we put it on. But our job isn't to be pro or anti-government.
No, but your job is to try and get the story.
That's right.
The networks did a very poor job of trying to get in there and do that.
We were screaming.
You have Peter
yelling.
Arnett, you have John Alpert, or the only people doing that kind of independent work trying to get that story out.
How about Simon at CBS who got busted
How
for
about
it?
Bob Simon? How about Tom Aspel, who was in Baghdad? I mean, you know, you're just sitting here indicting the media, making general statements with no real specifics. You didn't do this, you didn't do that.
Let me give you some. From the op-ed page of the New York Times, Norman Solomon.
Of journalism.
You don't like the New York Times?
No, I don't.
Well, they always spoke well of you. Here is Mr. Solomon reminding the reader that Defense Secretary Dick Cheney received a complaint from 15 news organizations,
including
I
us.
presume yours was one of them, complaining about restrictions on war coverage. Here is what he writes: blaming the Pentagon for the quality of war coverage reportage is convenient for journalists who may feel embarrassed that reporters more often resemble government stenographers than news gatherers. This is 808 on the computer. No government edict called for ABC's Peter Jennings to exult in the brilliance of laser-guided bombs set off by the U.S. military, though he described an Iraqi missile as a horrifying killer. Nor were Pentagon rules a factor when CBS journalist Charles Osgood called the initial bombing of Iraq a marvel, or when his colleague Jim Stewart extolled 2 days of almost picture-perfect assaults. Finally, he writes, nor were journalists compelled to follow mentions of civilian casualties with immediate denial of responsibility, as when Tom Brokaw declared on NBC, we must point out again and again that it is Saddam Hussein who put these innocents in harm's way. You're not going to tell me we weren't a booster press.
Well, I would say there are parts of us that were booster, and no one despised the pool arrangements in the Gulf like we did.
And not only that,
we
the American people were not upset when you were not invited to the invasion of Grenada.
That's right.
Did you sue?
Yes, and we went in as much as we could. But the problem is, how are you going to cover the war if you can't get there? We don't have The networks don't have attack vehicles to take them to the
We are
front.
on CNBC and proud to be so at their invitation, and Vladimir Pozner and I and our guests will return in a moment.
Now in the Saudi Arabian desert, if Saddam Hussein had an A-bomb, he would have had one, but for a raid from those Israeli pilots 9 years ago, a raid that incidentally was widely condemned by the American administration.
So, I don't know. I'm looking at this and I can't believe my eyes.
Well, what is it? Tell them.
Well, the thing is, what you're saying is basically that if you're the good guys, you can take out who you want without asking. You just go in there and wipe them out. Imagine if they were stronger. Well, how they'd come in and take you out. You're saying the Israelis could do it, so hooray for them. But what if they couldn't have? What if someone else was stronger? I mean, how can you possibly say this is the way to go? We've got the power, we're going to do it because we're the good guys and they're the bad guys.
Saddam Hussein, in the period up until the raid on the Osirak nuclear plant, had clearly portrayed himself to the entire planet as someone who would use a weapon of mass destruction against his arch enemy Israel. He had made the Jewish people or the Jewish state as some kind of subhumans that he would obliterate given the first opportunity. He set himself up. He said, I'm going to wipe you out. There'll be a firestorm over your country. Your artificial creation, and I think Professor Chomsky agrees with him on that point, your artificial creation in our Middle East, our sacred land, will be obliterated from this planet. If you say to me on the street corner, Vladimir, I'm going to punch you in the nose in the next 5 seconds, I'm going to punch you in the nose in the next 4 seconds, I'm going to punch you in the nose in the next 3 seconds, do you think I'm going to wait until 0 before I hit you back? No, that was an act of aggressive self-defense.
That is not the way countries react or should react. There is the UN, there's a consensus, there's a way of doing it the way we did it with Iraq.
Let me answer you about the UN. Yes, there is the UN, and in fact, Iraq was a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iraq allowed inspectors into its country to look at its plants. You know who those inspectors were? They were from countries like Hungary and countries like the United Soviet Socialist Republic. The Union of Soviet. That's who they were. They were Russians and they were Hungarians, and they would see exactly what Saddam Hussein said they should say.
So you're saying the UN is not an instrument?
I'm saying that the UN in that period, prior to
how many inspectors has Israel let in? How many inspectors has Israel let in?
That's another issue.
Well, not many.
Let me get to...
I see you in Managua. Did you want to say something briefly? We've got a lot of people here want some...
There have been a series of claims and aspersions, many of which are false, some of which are outright lies. As far as the positions that were attributed to me are concerned, they were total lies. Statements that were made about Nicaragua also happen to be false, but I won't go into that. On the case of the bombing, first of all, you might want to read a recent article by a professor of physics at Harvard who reviewed the place that was bombed and concluded, and publishes this in a recent article, that there was no reason to believe that it had anything to do with nuclear weapons. Now, Saddam Hussein was a monster and a gangster. He was when George Bush was supporting him, and he was when NBC and other television networks were keeping quiet about it, and people like me were opposing him. But the fact is that Saddam Hussein did not make the claim that you attributed to him. He did not say that he was going to wipe out Israel at first opportunity. Rather, he said something quite different. He said, if we are attacked by Israel, we will strike back and burn half the country. That's a different statement. Furthermore, last April, and here is something else that a year ago, and this is something else which I suspect that you did not report, Saddam Hussein proposed to a group of visiting American congressmen that all weapons of mass destruction in the region be destroyed, including his chemical and biological weapons, and he has, as far as we know, no nuclear weapons. That proposal came to Washington. At that time, you'll recall that Saddam Hussein was a very good friend of George Bush, and therefore there was a response. The response was, we welcome your willingness to destroy your own arsenals, but we do not want this connected with other weapons issues. That's an oblique way of referring to the fact that Israel has several hundred nuclear weapons, and not only Iraq, but Egypt and our other allies are very bitter and frightened about this, and of course Israel's not does not allow inspections.
Running out of time.
International inspections are not the way they were.
I think you've made your point, Professor. Let me.
I mean, let's.
I think again the professor is not hearing us.
One can have whatever one opinions would like.
Okay.
But let's try to keep to the facts.
Vladimir wanted to.
We have a specific case here. John Alpert, I believe you were in Baghdad and Basra during the actual war.
That's correct.
You got in there with Ramsey Clark, I believe.
That's correct.
You filmed destruction of civilian homes, what have you, which always happens in the war.
Right.
You brought it back. It was not put on the air, and I believe that your contract was terminated. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You're no longer working for NBC.
Were you fired?
Well, we were freelancers, so it's not exactly easy to fire a freelance, but we were invited to the door and told never to come back.
Okay. Now, is that not proof positive that there's some kind of censorship there and that you don't like to put on what you don't like?
No.
It's not?
John's leaving NBC had very little to do with what happened in Iraq. It has a lot to do with the great scheme of what's going on in American media right now. And the fact of the matter is, we felt we wanted our man Tom Aspel in there, who could report for all shows. The Iraqis, not media-wise, I mean, they think CNN is bigger than NBC and ABC and CBS. They don't understand in America that's not true. They confused John and Tom Aspel.
No, they didn't.
Yes,
That's
they
wrong,
did.
Steve.
Well, this is what...
Absolutely wrong, because
why was he asked to leave?
Steve,
I mean,
we made it clear
John,
to
I
the
know,
Iraqis that we were different. Honest to goodness,
But
they didn't
that's what
confuse
they were
us.
telling you, John, and they were telling us something else.
No, that's what.
When we said we were...
Overriding point here. Why is it remotely of any importance to the American public who covers that story? What the name of the particular person?
Tommy Aspel is a person who works for NBC. These networks, all three of them, spend $300 million each a year to cover the world. It is not conceivable in the new business climate for a lot of these corporations to say, if we're giving you $300 million a year to cover the world, why do you need freelancers? Most freelancers have already been gone. John was the last vestige. John was a dinosaur.
He is a dinosaur. I agree with
If John were fired, it does seem, if he were, let go, whatever you want to say. There were at least two other editors who were let go because they filed pro-peace kinds of stories. I detected in two newspapers.
Where? Names.
One Texas publication.
Names.
And one South Carolinian publication.
Names.
But that's not all. There was an ethic that I detected in the media, which was to scramble for the economic mainstream. The media did not want to lead. They read the polls that 73% of the people thought that the military censorship was all right. They didn't lead, and they ran for cover, and this is what seems like is going on here.
Did you not? Weren't you going to use his piece?
Sure.
You were going to use his piece. Sure. Why didn't you use it?
Because my boss said it's time that John Alpert and us sever our relationship.
Why did he say that? Why did he say that?
Well, because of what I said, the economics, the confusion over time.
You liked the piece.
The fact is that the piece wasn't all that great anyway, and that they've had trouble with John in the past.
Trouble? What's trouble mean?
Staging, interference,
I want to ask you
problems,
something.
all
If
of
this
that
happened
stuff.
in the Soviet Union, this same story, wouldn't you say that this has nothing to do with economics?
But John didn't work for
Here's the
NBC.
point. Here's the
John didn't work for
suspicion,
NBC.
Let's be honest
Hey,
about
Vladimir,
this.
he was a stringer. He was somebody
So
who
what?
wasn't.
Why is that suddenly so important that he was a stringer? You liked his material. You were going to use it.
Let's see what he got.
All right, let's show.
it was.
Here's a piece of what John Alpert reported from Baghdad, from Iraq.
Many people have fled to the city of Negev. Since one of the holiest shrines in Iraq is located here, it was thought the Allies would not bomb the town. The mosque was filled with the coffins of dead soldiers, other bombing victims, and the cries of weeping mothers. Here, too, there's not much business going on. And those who thought the town would not be attacked were wrong. And what happened in this house here? What happened?
One rocket.
A rocket?
One rocket, yeah. Yes.
Is this where the people died?
Yes, 14 people.
14
Babies and women and men.
Yeah. What do you think of this war?
Stupid war.
Is it really?
Yes, stupid war.
Please, let's understand this, Steve. You know the rap here.
Yeah, I know the rap.
Ramsey Clark, peace movement. NBC News doesn't want to get involved with that. Pretty soon they'll think we're wimpy. You cannot appear to be even close to the left during a war, and we'll be back in just a moment.
I'd like to go back or continue with this very important issue here. A spot poll, if I may. Stephen Friedman says that you were let go for reasons that had nothing to do with what you actually did. Economy, Stringer, not your story. Do you buy that?
No, I don't.
Do you buy it? Do you buy it?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't buy it.
All right, why did you go to Why did you go to
Why can't you
Iraq?
be more honest with us,
No,
Steve?
no,
I am honest with you.
Okay. Why did you go there in the middle of the war anyway?
Well, I turned on my TV set in the middle of the war, and I saw Saddam Hussein lying, describing the situation in Iraq. He wasn't telling the truth. And I saw a Pentagon briefing, and there was an officer standing up there, and he showed this lovely video of a laser-guided bomb hitting its target perfectly. And one of the reporters asked him, gee, you know, you've shown us only bombs that have hit the target. Is it possible that maybe one of the bombs didn't hit the target? He says, no, I don't have any information about that. And I said, my goodness, nobody's telling the truth here in this particular situation. And I felt it was my duty as a reporter and my duty as a citizen to go over there and see what was going on. So I called my pal Steve Friedman and I said, hey, Steve, I bet I can get in. And he said, give it a shot. So we went.
But the point here is that you may be wrong. Nobody is claiming that you're wonderful and bring all truth and virtue to everything you do. But the fear of the peace movement and the left is palpable within media. And the result is we do not get this important contribution or expression into our coverage. One more point. Howard Rosenberg, highly regarded critic for the Los Angeles Times, thought Peter Arnett was a brave man, thought CNN was great, thought the coverage was wonderful, but thought it was just awful that Peter Arnett actually interviewed a peace movement person who was staying at the hotel in. What are we afraid of? Is the American people going to be suckered in like like lemmings as the Pied Pipers?
Phil, is this the same? This is the same left-wing, right-wing press we had in Vietnam.
After 40 to 50,000 people were dead, then we changed. Only after some Pulitzer Prize winners like Halberstam and others had to scream at their editors in New York and threaten resignation.
The press in this
You are advocates.
We're wrong. We're not advocates. We're not advocates.
You just mentioned the American people. I suggest we try to listen to some of them on the phone. We have a call from Waycross, Georgia. You want to come in and tell us what you think?
Yes, I think the question at the beginning of the show was what was wrong with the press. And I think your show shows exactly what's wrong with the press. You started with this gentleman from Nicaragua who is expressing an opinion that is completely out of touch with reality. And the whole argument now has been couched and turned around to the point where you're saying the press did not adequately cover. And I think most people in the United States believe the press was too liberal in its coverage of the war.
Well, what should the press have done? Why was it too liberal? What did it do wrong?
Well, I think the things that you've already discussed here with Peter Arnett being in Baghdad and interviewing peace movement people that were there at the time, I think was totally uncalled for.
May I just say, self-serving as this is, here is Peter Arnett on the Donahue show responding to criticism on this very issue, responding to criticism from Senator Simpson of Wyoming. Let's see that tape.
Senator Simpson complains about me interviewing Ramsey Clark, a former American Attorney General of the United States, a citizen of this country of great renown. I mean, if I can't interview him, who can I interview? Is there a list of people that Senator Simpson has?
Yes.
Are you on that list?
Probably not, but I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what the list is. Especially in Baghdad, people who supported the American coalition decision to go into Baghdad. We apparently are not emotionally ready to accept criticism of the war, especially from behind enemy lines. Ask Jane Fonda.
All right, let's go to Reading, Pennsylvania. Reading, are you there?
Yes.
All right, go right
I just
ahead.
want to say that my son Joseph, who was the editor of the Kutztown Patriot for 5 years, was a bit disgusted and said, I'm going to write an article on peace. He wrote the article, and after 5.5 years as editor, he was fired from that paper.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
May I just see 807? Anthony Lewis, Tony Lewis, op-ed, New York Times, calls it that it was a claque. The media was a claque applauding the American generals. Here's what he said. In the press, and I include television, this is on 807 in the computer. In the press, I include television, its most powerful component now and the most egregious official lapdog during the war. Take that, Friedman. For the most part, the broadcast network simply transmitted official images of a neat, painless war, or worse, put a gloss of independent corroboration on those false images. Tucker, get in here.
Yeah, well, it was said a little while ago that the media is not an advocate, but what the media is supposed to represent all points of view. We should be hearing more of this. I mean, you do a show about Gary Sick and his Iran-Contra information. You have Christopher Hitchens on the show, and someone in the audience stands up and says to you, thank God you put someone like Christopher Hitchens on television, a voice from the left, which is never, if ever, heard from on television. I think this is a fundamental problem.
Well, but you know, if you cast this in terms of left and right, you're falling into the trap. This wasn't about left and right.
I think you're right.
And
is it?
No.
Suppose you got into Iraq with the editor of the Washington Times. Do you think you would have been your material would have seen the light of day on NBC? Just let him answer the question.
Suppose he got into Grenada. A better question. When the American military.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is that.
I want you to please be focused on this.
I get in everywhere, but the press in general doesn't get in.
Here's what I'm saying. You were a passenger with Ramsey Clark.
Right.
Ramsey
Clark
is an outspoken critic.
This is about war and peace, and I don't think you can categorize that in terms of left and right. You really should. This is about war and peace.
I think it's about control.
You've got 2 minutes, Professor.
It's about control.
You've got 2 minutes. Professor Chomsky from Managua, I just want to give you a time alert here because we're having trouble managing you. And believe me, we're media and we like to manage everything. Go ahead, sir.
May I go ahead?
Yes, you may.
A comment, I can't tell who's saying what, but a comment was made that we should hear all points of view. I agree with that. I also agree with whoever it was said that this is not a matter of left and right. There were a number of points of view that were not heard. One point of view I've repeatedly mentioned, namely the the Iraqi Democrats who have been fighting Saddam Hussein for years, who opposed George Bush when he supported Saddam Hussein, who opposed going to war and preferred the negotiated option, and who now oppose George Bush in his new support for Saddam Hussein. We have heard virtually nothing from them on the media, and they're certainly not on the left. That includes, for example, conservative bankers who say, though we don't hear it here, that the reason George Bush is once again, in effect, supporting Saddam Hussein in his slaughter of the Shiites and Kurds is because of the U.S. preference for dictatorships. Well, that's a point of view we've never heard. Those people have never been available. And it's not a matter of right and left. As far as the access of the peace movement to the media is concerned, I simply have to laugh. I mean, I've spent I don't know how many dozens of hours on radio and television in Canada, England, continental Europe, Australia, and so on and so forth. The very idea that someone who criticizes U.S. policy in a principled way would have access to the U.S. media is virtually inconceivable. Now, the questioner from Georgia, I think, hit it right on the head. He was criticizing me, but I basically agree with him. He said that what I was saying was completely unrealistic. And from the point of view of any viewer of American television or virtually any reader of the American press, that's a very plausible conclusion. And it exactly supports my point. Since the facts that I mentioned were in fact correct, they were not illusions. That's why the Iraqi Democrats...
Is there one person
Geraldo,
but nobody could know that.
There's not a person in this country, in the United States of America, who did not see the so-called collateral damage in all its horror, in its blood and its dead bodies, and how many times did we see the baby milk factory and the other bombed out buildings? And is it not a fact? Is it not a fact that correspondents touring Iraq today? Is it not a fact? Is it not a fact that correspondents touring Iraq today talk about how remarkably precise it was compared to other wars? And like John Alpert, I have covered more than my share of wars in the last 21 years of my career. This was a remarkably
I was there, and it was precise.
The bell's about to ring, John.
And it was unprecise. I saw some remarkably unprecise bombs too, Geraldo. A lot of people got killed there who were just sitting in their homes.
And I'll give you a chance.
How many people died in Kuwait?
And how curious are we? And we'll be back on CNBC in just a moment.
I don't think that we're going to be able to dot all the T's, cross all the I's, and dot all the I's, cross all the T's.
United Soviet Socialist Republic.
Yeah, we make mistakes, right, on this war issue. But I do think it would be nice to let our viewers have a couple of words on what they feel about it. We have a caller from East Meadow, New York. Your view?
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, I am calling in support of the media. I think that the criticism with respect to not presenting both sides of the issue is vastly overblown. What the professor was talking about the negotiated settlement, I was well aware of it, and I rejected it. I mean, we had a situation where one country was being held hostage for another political agenda, and I believe most of the American public rejected that.
So you are happy with the coverage?
I am, for the most part, yes.
Okay,
I don't
good.
understand why the local news was covering this. That's a whole different issue.
Yeah.
But
All right.
Let's try and get some more.
Let's go to another caller this time, Burlington, Massachusetts.
Yes, I thought that the coverage was outrageous, and I thought it was the madman from Baghdad, the dictator, the Hitler, and the last one, the Hitler, I think really points out the real problem, because I think that that is often something that is said by Jews about people they don't like. And when you look at the coverage was really controlled by Ted Koppel, Larry King, and other people who in the media are
Tom Brokaw, Peter Jennings, Tom Brokaw, Peter Jennings, Dan Rather,
So I
all
gather,
known Jews.
I gather you are not happy with that.
Or at least fellow travelers.
There were sort of two important things that I'd like to talk about. One was the way in which the technological dog wagged the media around, and the satellite transmissions.
Always that way in war.
But this was something extraordinary, this instantaneous coverage, and I'm standing here in the middle of the dark and there's something flying around
And
behind
therefore
me.
what? What's the point?
Well, the press measured its victories in terms of who got on the air 10 seconds before somebody else. They didn't measure it in terms of the real depth of the coverage.
That way, everything, whether it's war or riot or fire or catastrophe.
What's your second point?
And so
that's what network news does best.
And that's a fault, because in this particular situation in which the United States possesses these weapons of massive destruction, it's really important to communicate to the American people what these things do. And in the first part of the war, that really didn't happen.
Just curiously, Steve, how many people died in Iraq?
How many Iraqis? We think that 60,000 died.
Who cares, right? I mean, that's pretty much.
You have reported
60,000, I never heard of
What about
No, talking about the troops that the troops.
The Iraqi soldiers
right,
as well. Yeah.
60,000.
How many civilians?
I'm sorry. You do get, yes, we've got a break here, which is not negotiable. And we do have some other things we want to speak to. What's happening to my media? I mean, is this the headline that America cares about? And we'll be back in just a moment. Does the country of Panama ring a bell with anybody? Whatever happened to Panama? And is the Bank of New England broke? And what are we doing about the S&L crisis? And are New York's bridges falling down? And does anybody care? Are these stories, or is this what we care about? Here is America, tabloid journalism at its best. And yes, we have not a few talk show in this game. Who wants to start? Brother Tucker, what would you care to say about what's happening to us? Are we going to hell?
Well, I think it's increasingly so that we're going to hell. I mean, I think that if the evening newscast had marshaled all their technological expertise in showing us what was going on in the S&L scandal as they did in showing us exactly what happened at that Kennedy compound, I think that we'd be a lot more knowledgeable. I think that also, though, there's a lot of fluff that important news comes out of.
Two stories on nightly news on the Kennedy, 28 stories on the S&Ls.
I don't know if I buy those numbers. I would also say that Monday night on the NBC Nightly News, you spent the last 5 minutes or so profiling 3 single people, and they like being single. I mean, this is like news time.
Will you give us
It could have
this?
been
You've got to do features. Come on.
You got to do features.
Of course. Well, what isn't being covered?
Yeah, but things have gotten so bad. There was a PR person named John the Baptist, that came to see me 2 weeks ago. He said he had a client who had parted the Red Sea, who had walked on water, who had healed millions. And Geraldo told him he couldn't get on because he hadn't beaten his wife. I mean, we have gone to that.
That's not half the people would have criticized me for asking him 2 tough questions, the other half for playing along with his game. But I think that you remember back to the Depression era. We don't remember. We read about. And what were the most read pages in the newspapers before there was TV?
Right.
It was the society doings of the Vanderbilts and all the swells. It was trying to relieve the anxiety.
How about the Lindbergh baby kidnapping? When the whole country was out of money and going broke on bread lines, every newspaper did the Lindbergh baby kidnapping.
Well, I hardly
over
would
again.
equate
So
that with
I don't
whether or
understand.
not you want to be single. Does this conversation entice any commentary at all from Professor Chomsky?
Very definitely. For example, you mentioned Panama and you wanted to know what's happening there. There's a good bit of information about what's happening in Panama from the Latin American press and the international press and so on. What happened is that George Bush opened the post-Cold War era by invading another country, installing the rule of the 10% white minority, killing hundreds, some say thousands of people, expelled from the group of Latin American democracies on the grounds that it's a country under military occupation, not an independent country.
You mean it was a member when Noriega ruled?
Pardon?
Panama was a member of
Noriega ruled. If you see, you don't know the facts.
Well, I've been in Panama many more times than you, Professor.
When Noriega,
and I know Noriega's been a thug since.
May I answer? When Noriega ruled, Panama was suspended from the group of Latin American democracies because of his actions. And after the U.S. invaded, Panama was excluded permanently from that group because it was a country under military occupation. In fact, Noriega did commit many crimes. Almost all of them were committed during the period when he was another close friend of George Bush and Ronald Reagan, in fact, on the CIA payroll. Those were by far his worst crimes.
He started in 1968, which was before either of those
continue? Panama then had its first free elections in history last January. I doubt that your television network covered it, though I didn't watch. Those elections, actually, in those elections, the parties associated with Noriega won. Why? Not because the people liked Noriega, but because of the horrendous conditions that remain after the U.S. aggression. The U.S. had to veto 2 Security Council resolutions condemning its aggression. The Organization of American States condemned it. In fact, what George Bush did in Panama is not all that different from what Saddam Hussein did in Kuwait. Now, those are facts that serious media would have brought to our attention.
Did the UN?
I disagree 100% with that assessment.
Did the UN have a resolution against George Bush in Panama? Did I miss that?
Condemning it, both vetoed by the United States.
You wanted
Yeah,
to
there was a condemnation, but the U.S. vetoed it.
There were
So of course, so if the Soviets veto it, so it,
But the
that
Soviets
doesn't
didn't.
count. No, they didn't. But so
Yeah,
what are
but
we
if
saying?
the issue is ratings, I mean,
Excuse me for interrupting. The point is not about Panama, although it's an interesting subject. We were talking about these headlines, correct? And let me throw this to you, and I mean, you can beat me up, but this is what I feel about it. Number one, supposedly this is what people want. Okay? Now, you want to have Christians killed by lions in Shea Stadium, you will get it packed. Does that mean you should do it because that's what people want to watch? Question number one. And question number two, if you're going to throw this kind of stuff to people, are you not kind of closing down their minds? They want to be entertained. They don't want to know about Panama.
May I answer, Vladimir?
I think this is very much a function of the capitalist press, excuse me for using that terrible word, just as there is as a function of the communist press, which is also a terrible word.
Unlike the communist press, there is a vast array, a wild array of American media. It ranges from
wild is a good word.
Wild. You've got a smaller number of media companies, Geraldo, larger and larger in scope.
Now there are all these syndicators.
You have more than 90% of the cities in this country with one newspaper. including some very, very large ones. You cannot sit there and say how variegated is American media.
That same city has a dozen radio stations. It has maybe up to 35 stations on the cable TV. They can watch me. They can watch you. They can watch Oprah. They can watch Noam Chomsky on PBS.
But I think
much difference between those.
Right, but I think both of you are sometimes during the sweeps are polluting the American public. I saw something that I did not believe 2 weeks ago. People were actually on the Phil Donahue show without clothes on, and John Lofton was sitting there with a funny hat. I mean, did you take a poll and find out that the American public are deviants, and that's why you're doing this, or are you making us deviants?
Did you watch the show?
I loved it.
She loved the hat.
I love the hat. But seriously, I mean, why? I mean, is it because you think the public are a bunch of deviants, or are you making us deviants by watching this?
Everything. It's our fault.
When I watch Donahue or Geraldo, I expect a mix of stories. I expect one day transvestite hookers, one day a story about Iran-Contra.
Yeah, well, if you wish. But let me just say this. If you sell crack and people buy it, you're going to say, well, that's what they want. I mean,
Are you suggesting that what we do is an analogous to drugs?
I think some of these shows are actually perverse.
I thought hanging around with Donahue you became more sophisticated.
Don't get personal here, okay? I'm just saying very seriously that I think this hurts people.
But I do not.
And I think what you're looking at is money.
They can turn it off.
You're
Television's the greatest democracy in the world. People vote with their clicker. They can
either turn it off.
Well, can't you change the rating system? I mean, does it have to be...
You're guided by ratings.
Well, can it be changed?
Is there any honor in going out of business?
It depends what your business is.
Is there any honor in going out of business?
Put on hard news.
And we'll be back on CNBC in just a moment. Pay their taxes. And now they're on the Donahue show. It must be rating week, and it's about time for you all to turn your hymnals to page 26.
Ken Tucker, you're not going to let that pass, are you?
No, well, I would be very surprised if we are not rapidly reaching a saturation point for this kind of programming, just by the sheer fact that all these subjects have been done over and over again in permutations that I can't conceive of.
Nobody does them like we do them, Ken.
Yeah, well, maybe so. But I also think that the public is just yearning to get away from this kind of stuff. I mean, I think... May I make a point?
By all means, of course.
In February, because I had been in Israel, Kuwait, and Tehran during the... just with the nation at war, to be very relevant, we did 5 subjects having to do with the situation in the Persian Gulf. I got killed by you in the ratings. The point is, I agree with Barbara.
Please let me make the point that we did more than 5 shows on the ratings, on the war,
but not
we certainly didn't jump. We didn't burn the town down. So we're even on that.
Okay. And you do a great job. You're really the master of this forum, and you do, as Ken suggested, mix very well the Iran-Contra with these. Maybe they were involved in Iran-Contra, actually, now I think about it. Maybe that's the real answer to it.
Spartanburg, South Carolina, we're glad you waited. Hi.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. All of this, to me, has the aspects of the bread and circus of the Roman society. It's really covering up the very serious and terrible dilemma that this country now faces with the not only the savings and loan, but now the failure of the banks and a $70 billion bailout. And don't forget, we have a modern Nero waiting in the wings named Dan Quayle.
Yeah. Did you want to pick up on Professor Chomsky? Disadvantaged as you are on the satellite from Managua, you certainly...
Well, let me just...
Yes.
I'm hearing bits and pieces of this, I should say, but I heard a number of people make some comments about the general American population, which I thought were rather insulting. I don't believe them. I've heard people say that the American people don't want to hear the background and analysis and facts and so on. They want to be diverted. I don't have any evidence for that. So again, let me keep going back to the same point. Just prior to the war, when George Bush was just about to go to war, about 2/3 of the population was in favor of a settlement which would involve full Iraqi withdrawal from Kuwait in the context of a conference on regional issues, including the Israel-Palestine problem. Now, I think those 2/3 of the population were serious about not wanting to go to war, and I think they would have been very interested in knowing something that they could not have known because it was kept from them, namely that such a proposal was exactly on the table from Iraq. It had been regarded by the State Department as negotiable. George Bush had announced that we will not consider it. I think the population would have been very interested in that, as they would have been interested in knowing that that proposal was supported by Iraqi Democrats and, in fact, by most of the world. I think it's very insulting.
Professor, was that poll
that they would not want that kind of information?
Yeah. Professor Vladimir wanted to ask you.
I wanted to ask you, could you give me precisely where that poll was published?
There was a poll published in, I believe, January 9th in the Washington Post.
All right, thank you. That's just what I wanted to make sure of.
Weren't those figures, as I recall them, about 50-50?
No. 47 Democratic senators in the United States Senate voted for sanctions, and they did so knowing that this country was, at the very least, very, very up in the air about what to do, with more than 50% at that time, supported by Joint Chiefs of Staff, supporting sanctions.
But the way this country works, Phil, the Congress voted, and if it passes by one vote, that's how it goes.
The Congress voted with 250,000
people. It's not the job of the media to line up like this and salute. It's the job of the media. It's the job of the media to keep probing. I understand. But after that particular point, there was a little bit of a lockstep going on, and the media was pretty much at the mercy of what was going on in Saudi Arabia. They depended upon the American government for access to the story, and if they bit the hand that fed them...
I want you to know something, Alpert. Your stuff did not get on the air after Steve Friedman told you to go in and get it. After he was editing it for putting it on the air, you were fired because of budget problems.
But Steve fought for it.
Come on,
Steve.
Steve.
He wanted it on the air.
We'll be back on CNBC in just a moment.
Told as far as physical attacks and abuse was my mother, and but it would follow us. It followed us to a place of work. It followed us to public places like a grocery store, a shopping mall.
I'm glad you called Roselle, New Jersey. Hi.
Yeah, Phil.
Yeah.
What prompted me to call you was I think you turn in the papers over showing the headlines. Those headlines, to me, strike me as no different than the shows you have. And as like the woman on the panel said, you have nude people on the show and this and that. And frankly, if I was Vladimir, I'd be embarrassed to stand with you or sit with you on a panel like this. As you knock the print media.
Yeah, you do make a point. You make a point. Please let me just take one moment to respond to your observation. I am not ready to put the editors of the New York Post in jail for this kind of headline. I think it works. We have newspapers that are covered with red ink. I say, God bless them all. We need more newspapers, not less. The New York Post, for all its irreverence and excesses, may be the last best hope when the cops arrest your sister. I don't go through a day without reading the New York Times, but I don't want New York City to be served by only one newspaper. And if this is what keeps the paper alive, fine. I'm like them. I don't want to be a dead hero. So I ask you to at least understand that when I put transvestite hookers on the Donahue show, I get twice the audience. I'll show you the numbers. Twice the audience that I got with a program on the October surprise and the observations made by Gary Sick. With due respect to Professor Chomsky, we live in a country that has a diminished interest in serious news and cares more about Madonna than the city from which you broadcast to us tonight, Managua. And half of our kids couldn't find your city on a map.
Right, and they were not born that way.
And that is
why they were not born that way.
Right.
Yeah, they were not.
They're not born that way. That's the result.
And they don't. And it's not that they don't have the interest. It's almost like they're numbed by the stuff they get thrown at them from the time they're this old. And that is called conditioning your population to this type of stuff.
What do people in the Eastern Bloc want to see? Madonna.
No, the people in the Eastern Bloc want to see Geraldo because I'm on in Moscow.
And what's your share in Moscow?
My share is probably 100 share because I'm the only thing on.
And incidentally, Jimmy Swaggart is on in Leningrad.
But I still think there's too much pandering. I still think there's too much silliness. For example, the rape cases, those screaming headlines. Why not scream that for women, 1 in 4 are likely to be raped in this country? Why don't you?
Because they won't buy it, Barbara.
rape somebody. This is a big deal.
Incidentally,
when a woman is gang raped in the Bronx, that's not news. I want to know what
the great ladies in this. The New York Times is using binoculars to read the titles of books inside the alleged rape victim.
Lulled and pushed it.
How do you feel about that?
We still have a responsibility to do better than to scream and to pander to that.
One point that we miss and we must not overlook, if you want to see nothing but hard news, you can see it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Choice. There is selection. If you don't want to see Donahue, you can watch something else. And believe me, in the vast array that you see, the 30-odd channels available, there's something to suit every taste.
I agree with that.
Are you there, Jersey City, New Jersey? I'm glad you waited. Hi. Hello? Jersey City.
Yeah, I'm here. The local papers. One of the headlines you passed said was NBC right.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask Mr. Friedman, I know that office, I believe Mr. Gordner, but I'm curious to know as to whether or not personally, after so many years in the business, he agreed with it, or did he act as an obedient member, as a member obedient to management?
Mr. Friedman, sir.
Well, I mean, there was a lot of discussion on that, and when you work in a place...
We're talking about publishing the name of the victim, the alleged rape victim in Palm Beach.
And when you work in a place where there's a lot of discussion, all you can ask is that you're heard. And then you make a decision from the organization, and the head man makes the decision. Now you have two things you can... going to do it. I quit.
What was your personal opinion?
My personal opinion in this particular case, at that particular time, the name of the alleged victim was relevant to the reporting of the story.
Wrong. It was a day that will live in infamy. It was a horrible decision.
Well, I'm sorry. I agree with you. I wrote a column in USA Today that there are times that you have to publicize names. I mean, the man is smeared. The woman can attack without any kind of publicity. If you're going to publish the name of the male, you should publish the name of the female.
I'll say one other thing on that. If you tell me rape is a crime of violence, which I believe, and that women who are raped should be treated the same as other crime victims, then how can you dispute the fact that we put our name in?
There's a stigma attached to the crime that doesn't exist really.
With less than a minute, Professor Chomsky, would you kindly take 30 seconds and perhaps share with us your view? Do we break any ground here today, or is this just a bunch of media egomaniacs screaming at each other?
No, mainly the latter. As from my point of view, the major issues simply have not been addressed. We started talking about how the media dealt with the Gulf crisis. Surely the crucial question is whether the United States should have gone to war. Going to war is a serious business. There's a Harvard study that just estimates that 55,000 Iraqi children have died already, and there'll be 170,000 before it's through. Kurds and Shiites have been slaughtered. Saddam Hussein is in power with U.S. backing. Those are serious consequences of going to war. Now, it's very interesting to me that there seems to be a consensus that the media had no responsibility to present to the American population the evidence and the information that would have supported their view, the view of two-thirds of them, that there was a way out of the war. That information was not presented. The support for
You'll forgive me, Professor. I do beg your indulgence here, as I have time only to thank you, Professor Chomsky. Thanks to John Alpert, I hope you find work. To Steve Friedman, who accuses me of bashing NBC News. To Barbara Reynolds and Geraldo Rivera, and to Ken Tucker, keep writing, keep talking, and my thanks to my colleague Vladimir Pozner. May we say good night and thank you.